Hey guys, it's your old pal Tony Enjoy-T.G here, back with another episode of The Record Room. And on this episode, we're doing things slightly different, as the topic for this episode was chosen by our wonderful patrons over on our Patreon page. I threw out a few different suggestions and they came back and said, we want soundtracks. So soundtracks is what you are going to get on this episode of The Record Room. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, I'd like to get in on some future episode voting, all you need to do is head on over to our Patreon page, which is linked in our bio, and for just $1 per month, you get to see every episode of The Record Room up front, as well as bonus content, take part in said viewer polls for future episodes, and also receive a name credit at the end of each and every episode. All of that for only $1. Sounds like a good deal to me. And so what I've done is I've gone through and I've picked a couple of my favourite soundtracks, or things I've been listening to recently, as well as some new additions to my soundtracks on vinyl collection. And I'm going to kick off with this absolute gem of 80s VHS era horror sleaze. This comes courtesy of the good folk at Terrorvision Records, and this is the score for Spookies by Ken Higgins and James Calabrese. Now, I still haven't actually seen Spookies, even though I've owned this record for a few years, and I would love to. I just haven't actually been able to track down a copy yet, but I believe the film is either coming to or is on Blu-ray now, so I will be righting that wrong ASAP. However, the score for Spookies is fantastic. Way exceeded my expectations far more than I thought it would. It's, considering I don't really know Spookies, but I'm familiar with the Terrorvision label and what they do, this could easily have been a big budget horror score in the 80s. The Spookies theme itself, or the opening theme, it's so quintessentially 80s horror that I'm surprised it hasn't been around more. You know, I haven't heard it more. I haven't seen people talking about Spookies more and saying how good the music is. It's really a wonderful, wonderful score. It's a single disc cut at 45 RPM. But the great thing about Terrorvision and really what they do is, I mean, Spookies is, you know, it was a low budget movie, or fairly low budget movie, and is kind of largely forgotten today. It's not a movie that's spoken about really that much, you know, not really in the same vein as kind of the big 80s horror movies or big 80s VHS horror movies. You know, there were a ton of 80s horror movies, but, you know, even in the VHS era, Spookies isn't a name that I've heard a ton in my life. And I'm not saying this as some kind of horror aficionado. I'm just saying this as someone that has an interest in horror, but I'm not really familiar with Spookies and Terrorvision. This is a testament to how great they are at what they do. You get this really thick card sleeve, and it comes with this fantastic gatefold design. And as I said, this is a single disc, so doesn't need a gatefold, and yet it has one. And the artwork is absolutely incredible on this. The cover alone is just fantastic. I'd be buying this if I saw it in a store. So you get the cover, but then you also get this fantastic printed inner sleeve as well, which has, I believe that's the movie poster. And then you also get some liner notes there from the composers as well. And I know this had a few different variants, but the one I have, and this is so cool, it probably looks black to you, but I think it's green and blue, half and half with a black splatter. Insane. Like, I've said this before, I'm not really a fan of split vinyl because you can get some sound disparity between the two colors, but on this disc it sounds fantastic. And as I said, this is cut at 45 RPM, which I don't know if you buy into the thing spinning at faster speeds means it sounds better. All I know is this actual record sounds fantastic. And again, without Terrorvision, I doubt that I would ever have listened to this record or even known about it. If one of the, you know, kind of, if a Waxwork had done it or a Death Waltz, I may have been interested enough. It may have piqued my interest, but it's kind of, I bought into this because of Terrorvision, the label, and what they do. They shine a light on really obscure stuff, and some of it I'm a big fan of. Some of it I think is great, but, you know, not in my top 10. But Spookies, I have listened to this record so many times since picking this up, and It's kind of, if I want to listen to something 80s horror, but not something that's Nightmare on Elm Street or one of the latter Halloween movies or Friday the 13th, I'll reach for a Spookies all day, every day, because that theme alone is just fantastic. And as far as recommending something to somebody that isn't kind of one of the bigger ones, I would go with Spookies all day, every day. So if you're intrigued by what I've said about the score, head on over to the Terrorvision Bandcamp. You can listen to samples and I believe you can buy direct as well. So I don't know what you're waiting for. Spookies is definitely the one for you. I'm keeping things horror related with my next pick, but this is something I grabbed very recently, and this is one of the latest releases from Death Waltz, and this is the Pino Donaggio score for The Sect, directed by Michele Soavi. I think it was written or produced by Dario Argento. And I have to admit, I have seen a couple of Soavi's films, but I haven't seen this one. I haven't seen The Sect for some reason. I don't know why, but I just haven't got around to seeing it yet, which is odd because I do like his films. But this, even though this is from Death Waltz and is available through Mondo, I actually picked this one up through our chums at Two-Headed Dog, and I made sure to use the Record Room discount code, so I got 10% off as well. So again, this is another single disc LP, but with a fantastic gatefold. And the artwork on this, I absolutely love. And of course I love it. And I looked on the back and I was not surprised to see my old chum Eric Adrian Lee's name on this. I mean, check this out. This is so freaking cool. So cool. That's there. La Seta, that's the original name for the film, or I believe it's Italian name, because it's an Italian horror film for those that don't know. And I just love this picture montage as well. And as you can see, this is, I mean, it's bouncing off my lights like you wouldn't believe, because this cover is so shiny. It's so beautiful. Just everything about, I love everything about this. The typography, the logo, Eric's artwork, it nails the packaging from every angle, as far as I'm concerned. And how does the record sound? Well, the record sounds amazing. Big Pino Donaggio fan here. So I'm already a fan of this. You know, even though I've not picked this up before, I am a fan of this. And it comes on this nice opaque red vinyl. I think this is the retail version. I think there may have been one or two variants of this. There's probably a Mondo or a Death Waltz web shop version as well. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm happy with the single disc color. I'm a fan of this stuff. Pino Donaggio's score is very early 90s, I will say that. There are a couple of other tracks. There's a Keith Emerson track, and I believe there is, there's a vocal track by Ken Tobias, which isn't actually that bad. But Pino's score is very of its time, and there are people out there that they will try to distance themselves from that kind of material, but not me. I love what a lot of composers, or classic composers from the 70s and the 80s, what they were doing in the 90s. Some of them, it just feels like they couldn't be asked. Others took really wild chances, and I'm all for that. And some of this stuff on the Sect is just absolutely phenomenal. Sounds like nothing Pino Donaggio has done before. And this is the guy that scored De Palma films. Blowout. It's just a fantastic score, and here he is doing the Sect. So if you haven't already checked this one out, I would recommend you do so ASAP. Now my next pick, I'm completely off the reservation here. This is a very old album that's just recently made its way into the Record Room, and this comes courtesy of a localish record fair I went to probably about a month ago, maybe a little bit more. It was before the lockdown, so I've had it for a little while, but I'm sure, like most of you out there, I have a growing pile of things I need to clean and then listen to. And knowing I was going to do this episode, I knew it was there and thought this might be good to throw in there, because I wasn't super familiar with the score, although I've seen the film numerous times. I don't really remember the music sticking out that much, but I cleaned it up, I threw it on the turntable, and was genuinely pleasantly surprised at how good this was. And I know this is probably already going to bring some truckles to you guys out there, but I paid £2 for this, and I say this is a £2 well spent. I am holding in my hands Pete Best's score for Crocodile Dundee. Yes, this is an old school silver screen release from, was it 86? Yeah, 1986. And I have such an affection for this film. So a little TG tangent here. So back in 1986, I lived in rural Essex, and my parents we lived in a pub. My parents ran a pub. And I remember when Crocodile Dundee, the movie, came out. I think I was 7 when it came out. And I desperately wanted to see this film. I don't know why. I think the ad campaign on TV had just blown my mind to the point where I had to see Crocodile Dundee. And one day my father took me and my younger sister to the cinema to see this film. But unlike in the US, where a parent or a guardian can take a younger person to see an NC-17 rated film, I think this film was rated 15. Over here in the UK, if you're not 15, or I wasn't at the time, you weren't seeing this film. So I was broken-hearted that I couldn't go and see Crocodile Dundee on the big screen. But then, obviously about a year later, it came to VHS. I was able to see it, and I did love the film. I've seen it many times, but I haven't revisited the film since being an adult, and I'm sure it's probably got some things in there that are very un-PC for, today's times. But the score for this, I remember the song by Mental as Anything, Live It Up, which I still think is a great pop song. It's not actually on here. This is just the Pete Best score, or sorry, the Peter Best score, I should say. And the score is actually divided into two halves, two sides. The first half is Never Never, which is Mick being in Australia, in the outback. And then the second half is him in New York. So the first half of this record has got some great kind of almost blues guitar, which really surprised me at how good it was. And then the New York is quintessential, typical 1980s New York on a record. If you can imagine every 80s film set in New York, that's what that sounds like. So if that appeals to you, track down this album. I've already looked on Discogs. It's not selling for a lot. I paid £2. I think you can get copies for about 3 or 4. It's really not expensive and so worth it. In fact, go online now, go on any DSP that has it, go on YouTube and check out samples, because this is one of those things, I saw it in like a £2 bin and thought, is this going to be worth £2, or is this going to be another one of those records where I'm like, that was a waste of £2. You could have bought a coffee and had a better time. But genuinely, I am stoked I picked this up, and I've already listened to it more than once, and I can see many more listens in the future. So a little bit of a dark horse there, but I do recommend the Peter Best score for Crocodile Dundee. Now, where do you go after talking about the musical chronicling of Mick Dundee's escapades in America? Well, I don't think you can get any higher. I'm of course kidding. I'm of course kidding. But I'm going to talk about one of my favourite scores now of all time. In fact, this is in the history of history. This is probably top 5, if not top 3. And as I mentioned on previous episodes, alongside being a big, obviously, record collector and a music fan, I'm also an avid gamer and do, own quite a lot of video game scores and music on vinyl. And this score for Shenmue, released by the good folk at Data Discs, is one of those records that really captures a moment for me. The first time hearing this, it was great because it took me back to that time in the early 2000s when I first played Shenmue. Shenmue it's hard to really define as a game, kind of RPG, kind of adventure. It took me back to a time when I played the game first and didn't really comprehend what I was doing. In fact, I don't even think I finished the game the first time around, but a couple of years ago, Mrs. Giles actually bought it for me for our wedding anniversary, which is around Christmas time. So I played the game around the Christmas holiday when I was off work, and now when I listen to this, I have so many fond memories of playing back through that game that every track on this is almost a trigger for me. Sedge Flower on this, occasionally there will be just one single tear, I guarantee it. It's such a wonderful, heartwarming, emotional score. It's very easy to label this as oh, it's Asian influenced. You know, if you're ever kind of in the mood to hear something along those lines that you might hear in like, you know, a kung fu movie or an old samurai flick. Yeah, I mean, it would be really lazy journalism to just say, oh yeah, like listen to this. It's like listening to an album of like, you know, Asian stuff or, you know, the Far East. But it's so much more than that. It's hard for me to put into words how good this is. It genuinely is. And Datadiscs, I was so happy when they announced this because Shenmue, hey, is one of those games that it's not for everybody, but if it's for you, it's really for you and you will be such a fan, and it's something you'll take with you as an experience. It's not a game that you just throw on and play, it's something you live through, and the music really captures that. And this is actually the first pressing of this record, and the record itself, it's got this nice spot varnish here on the logo. I'm not actually sure if you can see that, but you also get inside a nice litho print of the sleeve. And what's cool about this is this variant, which is now long sold out, and this record has been repressed a couple of times, I think now. It has this really cool kind of like a light turquoise-ish blue and then another blue inside of it. And as per usual with everything Datadiscs do, this sounds amazing, absolutely amazing. I would recommend this to anybody. I seriously, when I say top 5, top 3 maybe, I listen to this record all the time. I listen to it when I'm not in the record room. I listen to it digitally as well, and it's just, it gets to me. It really gets to me. There are some records that are triggers, and for me, Shenmue is. It's almost to the point I thought about not actually including in this episode because this record almost turns me into a bumbling fool with my memories that are tied into it and just how beautiful the record is and how good a job, you know, Datadiscs did on the release. So this may or may not still be available from Datadiscs. If it's not, look around on the second-hand market. I'm sure you may be able to find a copy. But as always, if you're not sure what it sounds like and you're intrigued by what I've said, jump online and listen to some samples. I guarantee you will not be disappointed. Now, we've had some horror scores. We've gone back to the 80s with Crocodile Dundee. I've spoken so eloquently about my love for the video game Shenmue and the music contained within, and the most logical direction to go to next is the curated soundtrack to a series of novels. Right? I mean, that's where you'd go, right? The album I hold in my hands is the fantastic soundtrack to the Vinyl Detective series by author Andrew Cartmel. And if you're not familiar with the series, the title kind of says it all for you, really. It's action-adventure detective novels with a very, very heavy leaning on vinyl, on record collecting and tracking down rare records. And that's something that appeals to me no end. I stumbled completely blindly on the Vinyl Detective series one day when I was given a book token for Christmas, didn't really know what to spend it on, typed in vinyl in the search bar and discovered the Vinyl Detective. At the time there were only 3 novels available. I bought all 3 and then read all 3 in 3 consecutive days because they were just fantastic. I couldn't put them down. So much fun. I fell in love with all of the characters, and shortly after finishing the 3rd book, I actually managed to find Andrew online and reached out to him, and we had a wonderful conversation on a podcast that I hosted, which I'll actually link below. And he mentioned a little while after that there was going to be a soundtrack for the Vinyl Detective series, and that's what this is. This came out latter half of 2019, I believe, and there is a wonderful theme to the Vinyl Detective series by Joe Kramer, who he did the score for Comrade Detective and also one of the Mission Impossibles as well. It might be Mission Impossible 5, but don't quote me on that. But the album itself, aside from Joe's fantastic theme, is also filled with some brilliant jazz tracks. The character himself, the Vinyl Detective, is very much a jazz nut, and the album is just a brilliant jazz compilation with those orchestral tracks aside. You've got kind of Miles Davis Quartet on here, Charles Mingus, Cannonball Adderley, Bill Evans, and just, it's a lot of people, a lot of names you would know, and it's just fantastic. I would recommend this as a kind of a jazz for beginners almost kind of LP. It's brilliant. And what's cool about this is Andrew actually signed this for me, which is very, very cool. This, I believe, is available now in record stores. It comes with this really cool insert, which has information about each track written by Andrew as well. So there is that. That's very, very cool. And the Vinyl Detective series is now also available. I think they're starting to do them in Germany, in German editions as well. So that is very cool. And now I think there are 5 books at the moment, and there is another one, or the 5th one is coming. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've actually read all the books, but the last book was so good. And each book kind of has a different topic. And the last book was about UK folk, and it was so good. I don't want to go into any details about the books, but it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And it's a pretty standard album, single sleeve, comes on a very nice big thick slab of black vinyl, which you can see here. And if I were you, I would jump on this one ASAP, because as for relaxing listens and something that we all need in this time, that is just wonderful. I would recommend that to everyone, as I would most of the records I talk about, but the Vinyl Detective compilation is just superb. Now, we are coming to the end of this episode of The Record Room, and remember, if you would like to take part in future viewer poll episodes, all you need to do is head on over to our Patreon. It's only $1. You get to see every episode up front, vote on future episodes, and also receive a name credit at the end of the episode. But I'm going to finish with one of my most recent acquisitions, and something I was very, very happy to receive into The Record Room, and that is Friday the 13th, Part 6, the classic Jason Lives. Now, this is by Harry Man. You know, something's not right. Something's missing. Hang on a second. Now, that feels a little bit better. I'm talking about Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. Music by Harry Manfredini, recently released by Waxwork Records. And this is my favorite entry into the series. I've always loved Jason Lives, and I think the reason why I like this movie so much is because it's very much like an 80s action film. And, you know, if push comes to shove, 80s action all day, every day, twice on Sunday. That's my wheelhouse. That's where I live. And Waxwork Records, as per usual, they are absolutely killing it with these Friday the 13th releases. And the artwork on this by Ghoulish Gary Poulin, I mean, just absolutely wonderful. There is, like, the attention to detail is just insane here. And what's great about this is the record itself also contains material not heard in the film. So you're getting the complete score plus, you know, some extra stuff. And the record itself, I'm going to show you both discs because they look insanely cool. And the center labels on this, they work so well. How badass is that? I can't even describe. It's kind of like a milky, pinky, swirly splatter. But what's cool is, I hope you can see this, there is the Jason as James Bond on the label, which, I mean, come on. That is pretty badass. And then on the other one as well, if you're a fan of this movie, which I'm sure everybody is because, you know, Part 6, Jason Lives rules, you also get the smiley face in the tree bark, which one of my favorite parts of this movie. And, you know, this record, it looks good and it sounds as good as it looks, which, you know, I've always said is a huge part of record collecting for me. It's great if a record looks a certain way, but if it sounds a certain way, well, you know, that's just great. I own every single Friday the 13th release from Waxwork so far. They've done such an amazing job on this series, and I will continue to buy them up until the series ends, because they are so good at what they do. And there you have it, folks. Another episode is in the book. Thank you to our wonderful patrons for picking soundtracks for this, our first Patreon polled episode. Remember, if you'd like to get involved in future episodes, all you need to do is head on over to our Patreon page, which is linked in our bio. As always, stay safe out there, stay gold, wash your hands, and spin those blackest circles. I'm off now to make sure that the teenagers in the neighborhood aren't smoking the Mary Jane or having premarital relations. No wonder Jason was pissed off all the time. Can't ever drink anything.